So for today's tutorial, we're going to look at Crossfade by Paramter. You can use this for multiple reasons, but in our case, we're going to use it to crossfade weapon gunshots over distance. And this one's a little bit more complex than the previous one, so let's just jump right in. So first of all, what are we going to do? We're going to create a patch again. And so we come down here and we say audio MetaSound patch. And what are we going to call it? MSP for MetaSound patch. And then Crossfade by Param. And this is going to be for 3 inputs. And we open that up and we have again a blank canvas. So first of all, what do we want to do? We want to have 3 different assets. So we get our shuffle wave asset array, and out of that we say play stereo, and we want this 3 times again, of course. And then we're going to again upgrade these 2 inputs because we want to use them from our MetaSound. We call this one wave asset A, and we duplicate that, just CV, V. We call this one B and this one C, and bring those in respectively. These are going to be our random sounds for whatever we decide, because this is not specific to the weapon tails yet. This is just a patch that we can use multiple times. That's why these are named so generically. Otherwise I would say close, medium, and far, but we're going to do that here in the shared tails instead, like this. Okay, so what are we going to do now? This is the very beginning. After we do this, we want to mix all 3 of these together because they're going to be crossfading at some point. So let's do a mixer with 3, stereo mixer 3, and just plug all of these in. And we are also going to have our unfinished output, and that needs to be a trigger. Okay. We'll pull that out, and what do we want? We want if any of these 3 are finished, then they're going to trigger the unfinished. It is quite important, if this is the case, we need to have all these samples the same length, because when they're crossfading, if this one is particularly short, for example, and this one is particularly long, and it hits unfinished, then it's going to end it. So in general, that will only be a problem during the crossfade, and I'll show you why later, because we're going to optimize this and it's not going to play all these sounds at the same time. But it's important to know that it's better to keep all these crossfade by Paramter sounds a similar length. So when I add my tails, I'm going to make sure that they're the same length tails. It's just something to be mindful of. Later on, I'll show you how to create something that's more dynamic that will stop the sound based on the audio signal. But that's not a very performant option, and we should try and keep that to a minimum, only where it really makes sense. This is when the complicated bit starts. We need to map range float. So map range float. And here we need to start creating some inputs, because this is also something that can later be tweaked. For this tutorial, we're crossfading at 1 kilometer, so the units would be 1 to 100,000. But you can also use it for anything. Perhaps you want to use it for different wind intensities, and then you want it actually just to be between 0 and 1, or maybe 0 and 10 or something like that. So again, this is a patch that we can use for multiple different uses, so we want to keep this stuff as generic as possible. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to promote this to the input called input parameter. In our case, it's going to be distance, but it could, like I say, be anything, wind intensity or whatever. This can be shared between all of our layers, right? Because it's the same input parameter. So let's copy paste this. We need 2 here, just to be aware, and I'll show you why later. And then another one down here. Okay. So in that range, we also need to promote these 2 inputs, because as I said earlier, the range might vary, and we are going to normalize that from 0 to 1. So we don't need to change that. That's always going to be the case. Why? Because this is going to control the volume, and the volume is a float. So there we go. And then, yeah, we need to call this wave asset A, because that's the one it's referring to. And then we say start fade out, and this one will be end fade out. And then we go down to our next one. So let's try and keep this all nice and neat and align. How do you alignment? Align like this. Align center. You can do Alt Shift S. Q here. If you select all of them in Q, then it makes them align horizontally, and Alt-Shift-S vertically. Okay, so this is the first one that we need to do. So when it starts to fade out, I want the value to be roughly 25 meters. So that's the default. Oh, you also need to adjust the range. So the range is 100,000 because that's the distance. To be honest, maybe you don't need to do this, but it just means that when you're eventually editing it, you're never going to hit the limit on basically what the parameter is going to be. So I'm just going to set that to 100,000 right now. And the default value is going to be 25 meters. And for this one, we do the same because the distance is 1 kilometer. And we want the end of the fade to be at 35 meters. Again, you will be able to change these values later. I'm just having these as the default because I want to use this for weapon tails. But it might be the case that you want to put some different values in, maybe 0 to 10, 0 to 1. Okay, so now that we have our fade in, this basically means that as you're playing this sound, when this value, input parameter, comes in and it hits 2500 Unreal units, it's going to start fading the volume out. Actually, we need to change this from 1 to 0 because it's fading out. So range 1 would be full volume, and then it starts fading out, and then it ends fading out at 35 meters. So that's 0. How does that happen? It happens in the mixer. And then what do we need to do? We need to start fading in the wave asset B. So what do? We say promote to input, and what do we do with these? We put them to the same range, 100,000, 100,000, because that's the 1 kilometer range that I'm using for my weapons. And then we need to match this. So it starts fading in at 25 meters and out at 35 meters. So default 25 meters and out at 35 meters. And we need to have these numbers as 0 to 1. Why? Because that is what's happening. It's going from 0 volume to full volume. And we just need to do something a little bit sneaky here. We need to times the value float by float to this one and put that here. And we need to change these to, this one is the end one. So we say wave asset B, end fade out. So we need to make sure that these are named fade in, not out. Fade in, and this one fade in. Right, so it's fading in, wave asset B, which is this one, will fade in at 25 meters and start fading in at 25 meters and be full volume at 35. And this one will start fading out 25 meters and be completely 0 volume at 35 meters. And then, so this is fading in, but then when is it going to fade out? So again, input wave asset B, start fade in. Okay, so that's probably the most complex one. We have wave asset B start fade in, wave asset B end fade in, wave asset B start fade out, and wave asset B end fade out, in that order. And this has to reverse as well, like this. So this one starts at 1 and finishes in 0, and this one has to start on 1 and finish at 0 because it's starting from full volume and going to 0, and this one is going from no volume to full volume. And we're multiplying them, and that's basically the crossfading happening there. And then we have the very last one, which is actually similar to this, except it's going to be start fade in. Start fade in. This one's start fade out. Yeah, it's going to be start fade in. So let's just copy paste this. Okay, start fade in on wave asset C and end fade in. Yep, great. And we put that to the mixer. Cool, that's kind of the most complex part. So once that's done, it's actually plain sailing. Let's again tighten this up. So Shift Alt S, and then Q. Okay, now it's nice and neat. And You might think that that is nearly done, but now we're going to do some optimization. This is kind of the annoying part, but first of all, we need a trigger. So we need an input, and we say trigger start, and we need it to be a trigger here, and we pull that in. And then what we want is a trigger compare. Trigger compare, and we want a float, because that is the input that we have here. This, right, sorry, so I made a mistake there. This needs to remain the input parameter, obviously on in, and then range fade in from A and fade out, and then this. Okay, sorry, so just to, before we carry on, I'm just gonna change these values because these values are not exactly correct. So let's just change these to 50 meters, and then this to 75 meters. And then we change these to 50 meters and 75. I forgot that I'm actually doing this at 1 kilometer, not 100 meters. And then we're doing this one from 150 meters. I need to make that max 1 kilometer. So 150 meters. Also make sure this one has a max range of 100,000. We do this, we fade this out at 175 meters, and then these two also need to have a maximum of 100,000 and 100,000, and we do this from the same as these. We do this the same, 150 meters to 175 meters. So just make sure when you're going down this line of inputs that these two reflect these two values, and these two values reflect these two values. Then you'll have a perfect crossover. And it's being currently mixed in audio at these points. And it's just, you know, equal gain. It's not equal power or anything like that. So now what we want to do is optimize after we've made sure that all these values are correct. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our input is no more than our end fade out point, right? Because once it's faded out, we don't want this to trigger at all. And what I do is just a little safety measure is I just say plus add float to float, just +1 on the units. Actually, it should be more like 0.1 in case we have a smaller value. Actually, let's do it really small, just in case we have something more normalized, you know, 0 to 1. And yeah, and then we add it to B. So what is it doing? Our input parameter in this case will be 100,000 because that's the kilometer. And it's going to check, where are you, where are you, where are you? This input parameter is supposed to be 100,000. And it's going to check, where are you, where are you, where are you? And once it hits above 75, let's do exactly this, 75. That's going to be the last time it can play because it has to be less than. And we just have this little safety thing here, which is 0.01 above. And then as soon as it goes to here, then this is going to be more. This value is going to, well, this value is going to be more than this one. And then it's not going to trigger. And that's basically optimization for you. So this is fantastic. It's a little bit more annoying to set up, but actually it really saves cost because now we're not processing a wave asset. If we didn't have this optimization, even if you were playing here, perhaps you're crossfading between these two, it would still be triggering this and just muting it over there. So you would still have 3 voices being played, all 3 of these, for no reason. And now if you're in range, you'll only have 1 voice and you'll have maximum 2 voices during the crossfade, which is only a small range within our distance, right? It's 25 meters within a kilometer. So it's unlikely that you're going to have 2 voices playing at the same time. Okay, so the next one is a little bit more tricky because we have to do in between, right? So what we're going to do here is get our input parameter again. The first one we want to do greater than because it's going to be greater than this value. And the second one we don't want to do less than, of course. Let's just put the input parameter back to 0. And what do we want here? We want our start fade in, right? So wave asset start fade in. Let's just check that that's right. Wave asset B, start fade in, range from the beginning, yes. And we also want to do our little cheeky safety thing, except actually this time it needs to be minus. Minus subtract float, and we put this in the top. Minus 0.01, just in case we have a value that's smaller than, you know, a kilometer next time. And we plug that in there, and we say greater than. And when do we want it to be greater than? Yes, the fade in. So because that's when it starts, right? So we don't want it to be 75 meters because then it's only gonna come in at the end. We want it to come in at the start. So that's the start. And we also want to make sure that it's coming in just a little bit before, so there's no funny stuff happening. But then after that, we need to compare again. So we go to the second compare and we say, are you less than this one? This is when it fades out again, right? So that's the end of the fade out. Put this in here and we say less than. Oh, and we want to have our little cheeky safety measure. Put that in there. So now we have less than, and then only once those two things are true, it's greater than the minimum start time and more than the maximum fade out value, I should say. And then we can trigger the wave asset. So it's a little bit of a weird one, but again, this is definitely worth it for the optimization of making sure you don't have too many voices playing that are not needed. And then the very last one, you've probably guessed it by now, we can copy and paste. We also want the minus, we can copy paste. And then it starts fading in, right, at this value. We put that there. Sweet, so now this is also optimized. You're only ever going to get one voice playing, or you will get maximum of 2 during the crossfade period. And that's kind of important, because if you have a huge MetaSound, which we will later, you really want to try and keep your voices as limited as possible. And this is a good way of doing that before you have to even think about concurrency or, you know, voices on a grander level for the entire game. Of course, now we need a way to hear the sound, obviously. So we can have an output. Oh, we need to make an output. Audio, make sure it's audio. And we have output L and output R. And we can bring those both in. And again, because this is a patch that we might want to use for mono and or stereo, we can do cheeky this thingy, audio mono. Oh, well, that copies and pastes it. That's nice. And also just put this here. I need to find out from Epic if this has a lot of cost to do this. Okay, so now what do we have? We have our audio output. We have our, if any of these things are finished, it will stop the sound. And we have our wave asset, a wave asset B, wave asset C. They're all crossfading correctly and everything is optimized. Fantastic. So I like to do this now. Audio fading. Just, this guy's a little cheeky one. So we can just say this is the audio section, and you can press C, by the way, to comment. Oh, where's the trigger here? That was a good catch. This needs a trigger as well. So if you highlight a bunch of stuff and press C, you get a comment, and then this is optimization. Now, if somebody who didn't build this patch goes, why is there this weird compare thing? This doesn't make any sense. Like, it's just extra work for, you know, the actual stuff that I want, which is the crossfading. Then they can see, oh, right, it's optimization, easy. And this is the bit for audio. So this is the mixing. Actually, this can all come in together because it's audio. And then if you really want to be fancy, we can say outputs. So that is nice and neat. That is optimized. And next time, if you want a crossfade, you know, by 2 inputs, you just obviously don't have to do this part. And if you want to crossfade by 4 or 5 or 6 or 10, you just have to basically copy paste this middle bit and keep adding it down, making sure that, you know, B lines up with A, and then the second B lines up with C, and then the same C and C, and B, D and D, and E and E, and, you know, whatever. So you can scale this. I would love it if there was a way that you could do this more quickly, but as this crossfade by Paramter is a custom patch that we're making, and it's not a Unreal Engine out of the box thing, yeah, you have to do it like this, unfortunately. But the cool thing is, when we go to the shared tails, we just right click here and we say crossfade by Paramter, boom, and we have our entire thing here. Now, this is another thing that we have to set up, which is a little bit annoying, but I'm glad that Unreal has this. So we go back to, you can just double click to go back here. And now we have all these different inputs, but we want to categorize them, right? So what we can do with that is we can say the very thing that we want at the top is the trigger. So that can be set order 0. Then the input parameter can be the next one. So I like to do these in values of 5, just in case there's, for whatever reason, you need to slot something into the middle later. It's always better to have a little bit of slack. So the next one is going to be 5, 0, 5. Then wavetable asset A will be 10. And we want the fade in and out to also be 10 and 10. And then B, we want to be 15, and all the B's. $15, 15, and then C we want to be 20, and then the C's here 20 as well. You see that set order, just so you're aware, 20. And now we have it in a nice order. So, hey, if I said A, god damn it. 10, 11, these are the wrong way around. 10, and this one, 11. Okay, it's a bit fiddly, but better than nothing. Cool, so now you have this crossfade by parameter, you have your trigger start, you have your input parameter, you have your wave asset A, when do you want it to start fading out, when do you want it to end fading out, and you can also double check your values here. So 5, 5, 75, 75, 15, 15, 175, 175. So these are all working. Now the nice thing about this is that you can change these values here, right? So if you have this crossfade parameter, you can also say, if you wanted to, you can say 0 to 1, 0, 0 to 1, and then this one from like 2 to 3 and 2 to 3, and that would still work for all intents and purposes, depending on what your input parameter is there. So yeah, this is now a patch that you can use for anything, which is great. But we have set it up specifically for our weapons, so that's why it has these values. We can also fix this, right? So let's go back here and just say on finished we want at the top. So that's set order to 0. Then we want left. Let's do 5, right 10, and out mono 15. Let's save, come here, and now it goes left, right mono, right? Okay, so how do we plug this into the broader context? First of all, we need to promote this to an input, and we call this weapon tail. Weapon tail close, and promote the input weapon tail mid, and this promote the input weapon tail far, and we bring in our assets. So add one here. Close was the weapon shared land close 01, and then we add here mid weapon tail land, yeah, mid, and then far basically. So now these are going to crossfade. Just remember, we don't do it in the patch because we're going to use this patch for multiple things, so we don't want to have a default sound in there. But once we bring it into our weapon tails, it's more specific. So now we can name our variables actually what they do. Cool, and all the values are already set up, so we don't have to do that again. We need to trigger start. How are we going to trigger start? So actually, in my demonstration, I had a variable that is either, inside or outside. But what I will do instead is actually just trigger it from the room. So we can say compare int, and we need the trigger on play again, right? And compare, and then if we say it equals to, where is this room size? That's what we made earlier, remember? We have the room size for the different rooms, and the room starts, if it's on 0, then it doesn't have a room. So what we're going to do here is say if it's room size, so it doesn't have a room, then that's when we play the outside tail. Makes sense, right? And then we plug that in there. Then we need to mix these together, don't we? So on finished, okay, the mixer, I think we're gonna mix, to be honest, I'm just gonna do a mixer 5, stereo mixer 5, because if we have a couple of extra ports that we don't use, it's fine. I just don't want to be constantly deleting and creating bigger mixes. So this goes like this, left and right. We can also, let's also fix the order of these things. So let's go to our outputs. Unfinished is first, then left is 5, right is 10, and mono is 15. That way we get consistency, right? It's always about consistency, ease of use, so that when you're debugging things, you don't get confused. And so, did I save? Save. Now this is the same, right? Unfinished left, right, mono, unfinished left, right, mono. So and then we, obviously want the sound to come out, and unfinished. Right, so this is actually already where things start to get a bit complicated, because these tails are very different from these tails. So I'm going to show you how to create something, but in the next video. It will be a quick video because we've already learned quite a lot now. Let's just say unfinished. I know that these tails are always longer. Just for demonstration purposes, we can do this. Oh, we also need the distance parameters. So just before we end things, you have to add an interface, and one of those is attenuation here, and then you get your distance. So here we get distance, and the distance will be, you guessed it, 1 kilometer. So that's 100,000 units, and we can put that in here. And now our crossfade by parameter is going to work. So let's see what this sounds like. It sounds like a gunshot. And if we do it a bit further, this has to be greater then. Yes. Okay. There we go. So now we have our far, our mid, so these are that's actually the same tail that I've just processed in DAW, so it's not exactly a huge difference between these layers, but it's enough to get the idea of a tail going further and further away. The thing is that we also need to use attenuation curves, right? So that's going to help with the volume change over distance. But right now it kind of just gives the flavor of distance, right? Again, let's just try with different rooms. So let's do room 1. There we go, tiny room. Room 2. Medium room. Room 3. Slightly bigger room. And back to no room. And we have a gunshot. So that is the end of the tutorial. For the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to get this sound to finish. Actually, that's a really good point. So you see that this is unfinished. If we then change this room to 1, it never stops, you see? So I guess we could do any, because actually these two tails will never combine, so we can do any 2, trigger any 2, and then that will actually solve the issue for right now, but I'll show you a more precise way of doing it later. Unfinished after 2 seconds, and then change the room type back to 0. And now when does it finish? Also, can you see there's only ever one tail being rendered here. So even though we have a lot of different assets, 3 here and 3 here, there's only one tail ever being rendered, except for perhaps on the crossfade, where, let's go to 60. See, then there's 2 tails. Okay, so in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do height, basically how to get the range and have a weapon tail play if you're above somebody or below somebody, as well as a slightly different way to have this unfinished call, because sometimes the tails are going to vary in length. For example, the tail for above you is much shorter than the tail that's below you, and these tails don't always play. So, you know, sometimes there's going to be somebody on your level, in which case that tail won't play at all. You need to have a way more dynamic way of stopping your MetaSound. I'll show you how to do that in the next tutorial.